Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Tyson Choptain. I'm Executive Vice President of Broadview Networks. I also operate as our virtual Chief Information Officer for our managed services customers. I'd like to start off by thanking everyone for taking time to join us today for this presentation about 7 ways to improve your cyber insurance application. I'm also joined by John Martinick, who's our Team Leader of Security Services at Broadview Networks. Let's go on, John.
Good afternoon.
So just to get started, we are using Teams webinar. So just some tips. If you want to ask a question, you can always use the chat function that is built into Teams. Simply click on that little chat button. It may or may not say chat below it. And you can just type in a question anytime along the way. If you want to actually voice your question over the microphone, please raise your hand and then we can turn on your microphone and your camera if you'd like, and then you can ask your question live, or if you want to have any kind of a conversation to go with that question. So please don't hesitate to do that if you'd like. Again, at the end, we'll have time for questions, of course. So we're going to start off talking about the current landscape of cybersecurity insurance a little bit and how it impacts organizations. We'll get into what it takes to improve your cybersecurity insurance application. And we'll talk about a couple of different items: information security governance, multi-factor authentication, endpoint detection response, hardware and software patching. We'll get into all these a little bit more depth as we go through the presentation. But there's really the top 7 areas we're going to focus on is, what we see as most common on most cybersecurity insurance applications as the minimum you have to even be able to get cybersecurity insurance. And I'll speak to that a little bit more in a moment. Just to understand what we're dealing with today in the marketplace when it comes to cybersecurity insurance. I know we hear about cybersecurity. I know people hear there's risks, there's threats, there's potential bad things that can happen to my organization. A lot of people default to it's not going to happen to me, or, it's just a few people out there that are causing a lot of trouble or noise. I want to make sure that everyone's really 100% clear on the severity of the risk of cybersecurity. It's estimated that by 2025, cybersecurity, or I guess cybercrime, the more proper way of saying it, will be one of the 5 largest industries in the world. It'll be larger than food production worldwide. It'll be larger than oil and gas worldwide. The estimate is a $10.5 trillion business. And just to be clear, the people who are doing this, think of this as a business. This is organized crime operating at a level unlike we've ever seen before across every industry sector, every country, every region, every type of customer size. We see very large customers getting exploited. We see very small customers getting exploited. It is across every possible industry and geography. So I just want to help, frame the idea that, it's not going to happen to me, or I'm too small to be worried. That's not going to be the case. They're going after absolutely everyone to get whatever money they can out of anyone. And it's widespread, it's common, and it's going on right now, probably inside of some of your organizations, and you don't know it yet. So one of the ways that we deal with the risk of cybercrime is by having the proper protection mechanisms in place, but by also having proper cybersecurity insurance to help offset those costs when there is a cybersecurity event in your organization. And I'm not saying if anymore, because if you've been lucky enough that your organization hasn't been exposed to some level of cybercrime directly, it's not that you just, well, you may have been lucky at this point, but it's not like you can go, oh, it hasn't happened to us, it's not going to. It will happen to you. It's guaranteed you will have some level of a cybersecurity event. How much you mitigate that and how much impact it has on your organization depends on what you put in place and how you pay for that mitigation and how you pay for dealing with the event when it takes place depends on your cybersecurity insurance. And the better your cybersecurity insurance is, the easier you'll have a time of finding the funds and offsetting the loss of having that cybersecurity event. The better your cybersecurity posture is, the better cost or premium rate you're going to have on your cybersecurity insurance, or the ability to get it at all. So when we look at this chart, what this is really telling us is the rise of cybersecurity insurance written up over the time frame from 2015 to 2020. It's an estimate in 2020. Basically, in 2015, cybersecurity insurance was a very small market. It was a very small amount of what was being done. But as we have seen, it has continuously grown as a need for organizations due to the risk of cybercrime. Just to talk through that in a little more detail, the average ransomware event is a $1.2 million cost. Now, smaller organizations are going to think about that and go, well, $1.2 million. I mean, that's just going to put me out of business. And yeah, I mean, this is an average across all sizes of organizations. But just to understand, this isn't just the cost of the lost data or the damage that was done from that. It's the downtime, the employee cost, the reputation cost. It's all of those factors brought into that cost. And that's still a huge cost. Just to be clear, looking at 2020 into 2021, the average across the industry was a 72% loss ratio. That's an unheard of loss ratio in the insurance industry. To be paying out at that rate is why cybersecurity insurance is getting more expensive and more difficult to get, because they're having to pay out such large dollar amounts. We saw it almost double in 2021 from 2020. It's continuing to increase. And even the cost paid for the average cybersecurity insurance package has more than doubled in that same time frame. Now looking into 2021, and we don't have 2022 data yet, we see that not only has the cost of cybersecurity insurance gone up, but the risk and the loss to the cybersecurity insurance industry had gone up. However, we did see a bit of a drop in 2021, showing that the actual amount being paid out by the cybersecurity insurance providers went down a little bit in 2021. Now, everyone's first guess is going to be, oh, that's fantastic. That's great to see. That means there's less cybercrime happening and less people are getting exploited. And sorry to say, that's not the case. The reason we see a drop is more people are being denied cybersecurity insurance. So even though the amount of cybersecurity insurance going out is increasing, the denial rate or the cost of it is increasing as well. And so more people are putting more protection in place, but more people are getting denied cybersecurity insurance altogether. In the local marketplace, we're seeing that companies that don't take action, managed services providers like us, see an 80% increase in their cybersecurity insurance costs. That's the increase of their premiums in 2022. So in our industry, as a managed services and security provider, that's what we've seen across our industry for the organizations like us that don't take action. For those that are taking action of some level, the average is a 40 to 50% increase. Broadview Networks through 2022, we actually completed our CIS IG Group 2 remediation. So CIS is the Center for Internet Security. It's the security framework that we utilize and recommend for our customers and that we do assessments and roadmaps for. We did an assessment and roadmap for ourselves in 2021. And in 2022, we went through the investment of completing our IG level 2 remediation of our own environment. And even with that completed, we still saw a 27% increase in our own cybersecurity insurance premiums. But if we hadn't done it, we would have been seeing at minimum, a 50%, if not into that 80 or 70 to 80% increase. So by doing the assessment and by starting and completing the IG2 level of the remediation, we were able to hold our cybersecurity insurance increase down to only a 27% increase. So what do? How can you help prepare your organization to be in a better place to receive cybersecurity insurance and to receive that cybersecurity insurance at the best possible premium rate? And what are the steps you need to take and what do you need to put in place? So to start off with, we want to just make sure everyone's clear about whose responsibility IT security is in your organization. Because like many things in information technology, the default assumption is it's the responsibility of the information technology provider, whether that be an internal information technology resource or a set of internal resources, or it be a managed services provider such as Broadview Networks. And we want to make it clear to everyone, it's not our responsibility for managing your IT security. It's our responsibility to assist you with that, but it's your environment, it's your responsibility. We will take very detailed and in-depth steps of work with you to help you improve your cybersecurity posture to make your environment more safe and better protected. But at the end of the day, it's your environment that you're responsible for. How many employees are dedicated to IT within your organization? How many years have they been in that position in your company? Do you comply with any recognized standards for cybersecurity? John, you want to talk through some of these different levels and talk about how people can answer those questions and what they can do about it?
Thank you, Tyson. Yeah, as Tyson mentioned, whether it's supporting an existing IT resource or multiple resources, having a complementary or supplemental information security officer is going to help your organization, not just IT, but organization from a people process technology standpoint, improve your security posture. Ensure you have the right policies, ensure you have the right safeguards. Not every environment can take every safeguard. So getting into exceptions or customizations, the old saying, a layered defense approach is still relevant. You might have layers of defense, or you might have compensating controls based on resources available or your environment, but that's all driven by a resource such as a VISO following a globally recognized framework and driving your security program forward, even if it's a small improvement at a time. Uh, the managed security services and virtual information security officer really are required to help you keep up with the always changing, ever constant threats. There's new vulnerabilities, new threats daily, right? So you need resources, tools to, at a minimum, combat the most critical items. That managed security service that could include managed endpoints, managed security software on your endpoints, logging and alerting, threat intelligence and threat detection. Ideally, all of that would be backed by what's called a security operations center. Generally speaking, a security operations center has eyes on your environment 24/7, and then the cost varies by how quickly they're going to respond to you. For example, you would pay more for a 1 hour response than 4 hour response. But that SOC, Security Operations Center, as part of managed security, would help keep eyes on your environment so everyone could at least try to go to sleep at night. Thirdly, policies. Regardless of the framework, be it the Center for Internet Security, CIS, NIST, payment card industry, generally speaking, your security program, security projects, project management, and the related mitigations, safeguards, etc., are all driven and start with policy. That policy is going to provide the direction to go to that's most appropriate for your environment. Even better is an assessment and a remediation plan that is going to use that policy to drive improvements forward. There's a lot of things to do in terms of security remediation and posture improvement, but you really need that guiding resource, leader, and a framework and policy to drive it.
Thanks. Talking about security assessments and training. So your senior executives need to understand the oversight that's taking place in your organization when it comes to what level of security awareness your staff have, your organization as a whole has, and what sort of assessments or training have been done. As John mentioned, you don't know how good your security posture is until you've done an assessment. We've seen many companies go and apply for cybersecurity insurance with their provider. The provider comes back with a list of questions that's even longer than the 7 we're going to go through today. They don't know how to properly answer the questions because they don't understand what their security posture is. They answer them incorrectly, or they just, have a very low score from a perspective of what they have in place, and they either get outright denied their cybersecurity insurance, or they have to pay a much larger premium to get their cybersecurity insurance. And then what are you doing for cybersecurity training, and how often and aware is not just the individual that does it or the management team, but the executive of what's been completed and where people are at in that cybersecurity training?
The insurers' requirements have, changed and increased quite a bit over the years, but one constant is that user training. So having a security awareness program that really is educating your users and people on how to interact with your assets, your data in a secure fashion. We can't just train at hire. We have to train, at hire and at least once or twice a year, and then train on relevant topics related to, real life global threats. That training typically focuses on social engineering and, preventing your users from falling bait to a phishing attempt or a phishing attack. But really, that training should encompass, password management, using multi-factor, looking out for legitimate versus malicious sites, hovering over links in email, those type of training. It really has to be phishing and more. Um, Other components really related to users and your own systems is scanning, right? As Tyson mentioned, it's one thing to respond to an application and check a box, but have you actually tested that safeguard? So that scanning and testing usually is a combination of performing vulnerability scans, to see what vulnerabilities are possible, what exploits are there for the taking, and then running penetration tests, typically external if you haven't done one before, to see what could be exploited. What do you have publicly exposed, and that can that be exploited from the outside in. In addition to that, we all use different cloud services. So you want to look at scanning not just your on-premise environment, but some of your cloud services as well. For example, running a CIS benchmark against your Azure or 365 tenant. We talked about phishing tests. Phishing tests need to be done on a regular basis, ideally, quarterly, at least twice a year. And we have to be careful with those phishing tests. We want to, obviously the point is to test users and have users learn to catch malicious and fishy content, but there's some ethics to that as well. So we have to be careful in how we test. And as mentioned, assessment is key. Generally speaking, at a minimum, you should, if you have never done an assessment, you should start by selecting a framework and performing your first assessment. That first security assessment is going to uncover your strengths and weaknesses, and more importantly, the gaps to address. Coming out of that assessment is going to be a remediation plan. That implementation or project plan focused on remediation is going to improve your security posture over time, but it's going to do it in a prioritized fashion. So let's remediate, the most impactful items first. Let's remediate the items that attackers are taking advantage of in the real world before some of the other lower hanging fruit possibly. And then validation. Just like testing, right? We assess, we remediate. Well, we have to validate. So that's usually a combination of reassessing or again running tests after changes to make sure that those controls are working.
So when we talk about, the controls that we need to put in place and the security that's, pivotal to most organizations, multi-factor authentication has gone from a nice to have to a good to have to a must have in really the last year and a half, to now many cybersecurity insurance providers either won't insure you or will raise your rates if you don't have multi-factor authentication on your cloud services, your email, and on any remote access, whatever type of remote access into your environment you might have. This is an actual quote from one of our cybersecurity insurance partners that we've worked with in the past. And this is specifically to say that one of the underwriters is now looking at accounts under 25 million in revenue, because for accounts over 25 million in revenue, it's not even an option to get cybersecurity insurance without MFA. But for those that don't have MFA in place, for a funds transfer loss endorsement or other types of endorsements as part of their cybersecurity insurance, you'll either not be able to receive that level of coverage, or you'll be paying a higher fee to be able to get coverage for those types of endorsements on your cybersecurity insurance if you don't have MFA in place. And since this was early in 2022 that we received this information, we've since seen multiple companies get denied because they don't have multi-factor authentication in place. The other trick we're starting to see in the cybersecurity insurance industry in the last year and a bit is late 2021, 2022, we saw people getting approved at a reasonable rate for the level of insurance, or the level of the quality of the cybersecurity posture that they had and the rate they were given. And then the next year, their rate just skyrockets. So they'll get you in at a lower rate, but then the next year they'll raise your rate dramatically, and they'll go from a quick 7 to 10 page questionnaire in the first year to a 20, 30 page questionnaire in the second year. So they've got you in now and they want to keep you in, and they'll raise the rates quite significantly.
Thanks, Tyson. There's been recent focus and news on different multi-factor attacks. You know, multi-factor is not perfect, but certainly having it in as many places as possible is really important. To summarize, you know, from an insurer's perspective, it's really gotten to the point of MFA everywhere. That means not only on, you know, 365 or cloud services and remote access, but insurers now are looking for MFA on server logins, workstations that people are admins on, or local admins, something like dual MFA on that workstation, or multi-factor when somebody goes to run as an administrator. That MFA requirement is really expanding, and that's also expanding to include administrative portals on your firewall, administrative portals of you know, networking services, essentially any service that could touch your sensitive data. Insurers are looking for multi-factor. Related to that multi-factor and remote access, just a reminder about open ports and ransomware. Even this year, most of the ransomware attacks are related to publicly exposed legacy or unused ports, or exposed ports that are not protected. That could mean, for example, having a remote desktop publicly exposed with no multi-factor. That could mean having an outdated Exchange server exposed to the internet. So we really have to look at multi-factor and combination of, well, what are we exposing to the public internet and why, and how do we protect that? There's a good point too to bring up is, you know, there's different authentication strengths. In a perfect world, text message or SMS is not a great multi-factor method. There's much stronger methods available, such as biometrics, physical hardware keys that you plug into your laptop or keep with you. So we also need to look at the strength of our multi-factor tools. And like we said, basically it's MFA everywhere at this point, and look at the strength of your multi-factor methods versus some of the older methods like text or phone.
And when we first started talking to customers about multi-factor authentication, probably, you know, more than 5 years ago, you know, we had a very small segment of customers that were already very deeply invested in security, and so multi-factor authentication became a driver for them early on, and they, you know, started rolling it out to their employees and to their users. And you know, there was a lot of resistance because people were new to multi-factor authentication. It wasn't something people had a lot of experience with. But now most of us are seeing it in our consumer lives, in our own personal lives as well. Most online banking applications want a multi-factor authentication. A lot of other online services either recommend or require you to turn multi-factor authentication on for using, you know, personal online services. So to make that transition now to people doing that at work, we shouldn't be seeing a significant amount of resistance to people needing to do multi-factor at work. And as John mentioned, there are a variety of mechanisms. So maybe you have staff that don't want to use their own personal mobile phone for that multi-factor authentication. Well, we can have it call them on their office phone, or you can go to the biometric devices like John was talking about. It's kind of replaced the old token style. So there's a number of ways we can do multi-factor authentication so that you can meet that cybersecurity insurance insurance requirement without having to require people to use their own personal devices if that doesn't fit for your organization. Endpoint detection and response. So just to sort of set the stage for this, for years we've had antivirus protection as a part of a core implementation stake of every single computer that's out there. If you have a computer that's talking to the internet, really what isn't talking to the internet, you have to have antivirus on it. Antivirus is great technology, but traditional antivirus is based on signature-based protection. And that signature-based protection does not stop the most recent versions of a threat. A signature-based antivirus can't stop a threat until it knows what the threat is and is able to identify it. If there's a new variant of that virus, then your current antivirus software can't detect and do anything about it until it gets an update telling it about that new variant so it can understand and identify it. Because of that risk, we're moving away to different antivirus technologies and we're moving to anomaly-based protection. So the question is, do you have signature-based protection in your organization today or anomaly-based protection in your organization today? This is a common question we're seeing on cybersecurity insurance, and we're seeing this affect the rates people are paying, the premiums they're paying, and potentially the endorsements they can receive if they have the anomaly-based protection, the modern version of it, versus traditional signature-based protection. The other question that's being asked in many cases on the forums is anyone reviewing the alerts? And that comes back into those managed security services and having a security operations center like John talked about, being able to do that review.
Yeah, Tyson hit the nail on the head, right? We need more than just known signatures. There's so many different threats, a variety of threats. We really have to use tools that analyze anomalies, regular patterns versus irregular. Really behavior-based is another way to put it. CIS has a specific safeguard looking for behavior-based detection technologies. Really important is, think of the good, better, best. If you have endpoint detection and response like a Defender for Endpoint, a Sentinel-1, are a few common examples. Even better is having that backed by the Security Operations Center. These tools are really good at collecting events, correlating events. Defender for Endpoint, for example, provides a timeline. So on any given machine, you can see a timeline of running processes or scripts. You can see the activity of a bad actor or a bad piece of software, moving from machine to machine or running certain programs, PowerShell scripts, etc. All of that information can be correlated and alerted on, and even better, proactive action taken like isolating a machine. All that can be done when you take the great tools and back it by that security operations center. Having, we all need to sleep, right? So having 10 tools might be good for you, but having 3 tools properly monitored and backed by a security team would be even better. We tend to over tool, and it's really important to select the right tools that aid in that early detection and response, right? We want to focus on prevention versus detection. But if we do have to do an investigation, the more information available, the better. So these systems really need to feed each other.
And endpoint detection response is critical for protecting each individual device from a real-time attack. So it's going to protect your workstations. It's going to protect your servers. What we see in the industry today is long before the attack actually takes place. So before a ransomware gets activated, before a virus starts spreading amongst computers in a system, there's actually indicators in the network, in the logs of the workstations, in the logs of the servers, in the logs of the firewalls and the switches to show that something may have been going on before it actually becomes active. And that's where security information and event management systems are very important to modern day security protection. And now, depending on the size of the organization and the type of industry you're in, we're seeing more cybersecurity insurance applications asking if you have a SIM in place and changing your rate depending on whether you have that SIM in place. That SIM is critical for understanding what's going on in the environment, not just real time as a cybersecurity event is taking place, but prior to it taking place and while it's going on, when you are compromised, the SIM is going to help speed up the understanding of what's happened, what needs to be done to respond, and what needs to be done to remediate. So it's a powerful tool for analyzing and understanding what's going on. And it's also another layer of protection and prevention. So today, do you have that log monitoring? Do you know what steps to take to detect and prevent attacks? And, John, please explain, the importance of the logging and what that really brings to the table.
Will do. When there's an incident, again, the when, not if. There's various reports out there. Some bad actors have sat in environments for months, in some cases over a year before detection. So if you have to go back and piece those breadcrumbs together or find that needle in the haystack, what logs do you have, right? How do you, with 100% certainty, determine the root cause? For example, when responding to an incident, if you don't have endpoint, server, network, firewall, etc. logs, you're going completely in the dark and throwing a bit of a dart on the board at that point. With the logs, it's going to help you, number one, respond sooner. In a lot of tools, that detection is going to have an automated follow-up response and help you to respond to incidents quicker, close those gaps quicker, address the root cause quicker. Logging in general needs an overall management process. So what are your logging requirements? How long should you keep logs for? At a minimum, we really need to keep logs for at least 90 days. And you see that 90-day number in 365. Even with the lowest licensing in Microsoft 365, generally logs are available for 90 days. So the log retention is key. You may have clients, or your particular business might have a demand that's 1 year. But you basically need to decide, what logs are relevant. Collect those logs in a central location, analyze, correlate them, alert on suspicious activity. Again, preferably all backed and monitored 24/7 by a security operations center and team. And then the minute there's an event, right, or anomaly, you have at your disposal those logs to perform a proper investigation.
So John talked earlier about vulnerabilities. So all software, all code has vulnerabilities in the code. The best analogy I can give for this is a brick wall. When a brick wall is being built, the bricks are stacked, and in between the stacks, we put down mortar, and over time that mortar, breaks down, corrodes, or possibly even when it's initially built, there's small holes and cracks in that wall. In the software world, when software code is written and being built, there are natural cracks and holes that exist in the code. The cyber criminals spend time looking for those cracks and those holes and using those cracks and holes as a way to get into your system, to expose those vulnerabilities as a way to enter an application, enter the operating system of a firewall, enter into the operating system or the application running on a web server, whatever variety of software we're talking about. All software has those vulnerabilities. All software vendors are aware that their software has those vulnerabilities, and as those vulnerabilities are exposed by both, ethical hackers, by unethical hackers, and by the efforts of the organization themselves, they create patches for that code. So they fill in those cracks and they fill in those holes. But to do that, you need to be on a regular hardware and software patching process. You need to be analyzing on a regular basis. Are there patches that need to exist in your organization? And are you properly exposing those implementing those patches on a regular basis? Oh, sorry,
Thank you, Tyson.
farther.
Yeah, no worries. One really key point to patching too is generally speaking, operating system patching, or those patches that we're all used to just doing uh, automatically, right? There's also items that require manual patching, right? Not everything is patched automatically. Um, so, for example, you might have databases, SQL databases, Exchange servers, web services like Apache if you're using other operating systems, right? Generally speaking, not those items are not automatically patched. So that's why vulnerability management and vulnerability scanning is key. Essentially, it's going to be a rinse repeat process, maybe monthly, maybe quarterly, depending on your environment, your data sensitivity, and other things. It's really scanning, remediating, rescanning. And depending on the results of those vulnerability scans, you might find something that needs remediation yesterday, or you might find a low item that could wait a week, depending on your, again, policy and procedures. But really, vulnerability management is key to finding those potential entries into your environment. Work from home is changing this as well. Some organizations have legacy patching tools that only patch when a machine's in line of sight of a certain server or in the office. Patching has to be flexible, adaptable, and really work wherever the machine is. Really key. And we need to scan at least quarterly to find those items that need manual attention.
So a lot of what you're going to get asked for in a cybersecurity insurance application is what security prevention and protection mechanisms have you put in place? And we've talked about a number of those. The other question is, do you have backups? And not only do you have backups of your critical data and systems, do you store them off-site? And not only do you store them off-site, have you done tests of recovery? We've seen more customers coming to asking for proof of their disaster recovery tests of their backup system, not just showing that there's data in the backup system, but actually starting their systems up in their disaster recovery environment and utilizing them to ensure they operate properly in the event that a cybersecurity attack takes place and your systems are taken offline or data is damaged, and you need to use your disaster recovery system to be able to be operational in a short period of time.
Yeah. We really need to protect those backups with the same diligence as we would, a server containing sensitive data. As Tyson mentioned, right, we need to keep backups in more than one place. Whether that second place is offsite in another city, in another data center, or in the cloud, we also need to make sure that if your main backup server or primary backup site is compromised, that site can't go and delete or corrupt or ransom, whatever it might be, your other site. So not only do we need more than one site, we have to have protections between those sites. That recovery data has to be protected just like the original sensitive data. That might mean backup, the backup sets are encrypted. That might mean physical protections. If you have a backup appliance in a server room, well, does that server room have a lock? Who has the key? Does it have a keypad? Who knows the code? Is there a camera nearby? Could somebody walk out of the building with that backup appliance? And if those jobs aren't encrypted, there's potential data loss there too. So protecting that backup data is key, along with regular testing. And we don't mean just restoring a file. We want to test restoring a file, restoring a database, restoring an email account, restoring granular data, a whole virtual machine as an example for disaster recovery. So regular tests need to be more than just, I can restore a file.
Thanks, John. So those are the questions that we had typically been seeing, and even in the last year, we've seen them get more intense. Now, we've also seen some newer questions coming into the cybersecurity industry, depending on, which insurance company you're working with, which underwriter. One that we're seeing is, what is your specific expenditure on IT security? They want to know, what are you spending on IT security to limit the chance of being compromised in the first place? Better understanding of your cybersecurity posture is done with, a detailed analysis of what tools and what processes you have in place with an assessment. But, without that assessment or without an understanding of what you're doing to remediate what's been assessed, how much you're spending is a good way for them to know that. And then they want to understand if you're intending to spend, more, the same, or less in the next year. How many employees are dedicated to the role of IT security? Do you have any? Do you have a partner that is? Do you have a provider like us that's doing so? If you have no one that's assigned the responsibility of IT security in the organization or assisting with IT security in the organization, you're potentially going to have a problem with your cybersecurity insurance. Most importantly, budget for cybersecurity and budget for your cybersecurity insurance. Make sure those are core understandings of what your expenditures are going to be in your next fiscal year, or in surplus that you have in your current fiscal year. Additional questions is, is any part of your system outsourced? So do you have third-party providers that are providing some of your environment or your IT security requirements. Make sure they have their house in order. I just talked about, we went through the effort of doing an assessment for ourselves and getting through the remediation level IG2 last year. We're working through IG3 of the CIS remediation this year to get our own security house in order. But your providers should have cybersecurity insurance. They should have security credentials and certifications. They should have ongoing security testing and training. They should be doing all the things that we just talked about. If your providers aren't doing this, that puts you at a higher level of risk. And depending on who's asking and what they're asking, they might want proof of this of your third-party providers. And John, you can speak to that in a lot more detail than I can.
Yeah, that's one of the biggest changes over the last year and a half, 2 years, is that evidence. So it's those applications have become pages and pages versus a few pages, and they are wanting screenshots, logs, separate documentation proving that, right? One recent application related to multi-factor. Oh, great, you have Duo, but show me, right? Do you have any users in bypass mode? So not only are they asking for more, they are looking for current evidence and really more than just evidence that you're testing those controls and that you either have automation or compensating controls. Okay, right? So if you're, as an example, right, if your backups are not encrypted, well, tell me about the physical security. Those follow-up questions and requests for evidence are becoming very, very prevalent on recent applications.
We have a lot of experience with those, in-depth security audits that some companies have to go through. John has that direct experience because of the industries he's been involved with in the past of our customers requiring our customers to have a certain level of security posture in place, a certain level of security practices in place. Even before cybersecurity insurance really existed, they were having to do that to meet the requirements of their customers. We're seeing that level now come into the cybersecurity industry. So we are now seeing that evidence-based requirement coming deeper and deeper, both in cybersecurity insurance. We're seeing, customers being challenged, and now we're seeing regulatory requirements in different industries that are starting to move towards this. And even in industries we would not have expected that from in the past.
So
But John,
we've,
you want to talk a little,
oh,
yeah, go
sorry,
ahead and
Tyson.
talk a little bit more about some of the other trends that we're seeing.
You bet. So we've presented on this topic a few times now, and since our last presentation, there was really three areas that stuck out from recent insurance applications we've helped clients, submit or renew. And there's been a real big shift towards data. What data do you have? What sensitive data are you trying to protect? And we're getting specific questions around one, data classification, and two, loss prevention. So specifically, as a real world example, do you manually or automatically label sensitive documents? For example, maybe you label a document as confidential and it's encrypted. So insurers want to know more about data specific protections. And in addition to classification, external leakage or loss prevention. So for example, in Microsoft 365, do you use data loss prevention to prevent documents with a certain label or documents containing certain content to prevent those from going external? Whether that's external chat, email, file sharing, those potential avenues for data to leave your organization need to be monitored and alerts created on for sensitive material. So there is a very recent and specific focus on data with the advent of SharePoint and online file services. Secondly, we talked about MFA, really MFA everywhere. And the two newer locations that they're looking for is your networking equipment. So again, admin logins to firewalls, admin logins to your wireless infrastructure. Are they using Radius or some other method to do multi-factor? And then on Windows servers, any server containing sensitive data or that could access another server with sensitive data, they're looking at multi-factor for server logins. For example, Duo. On the workstations, if you have a user that's a local admin on a workstation, they're looking for multi-factor. If users are not local admins, but they could potentially run as admin, they're looking for Duo on those run as windows or elevated prompts. And thirdly is security frameworks. CIS, NIST, PCI, they've been around a long time. They're proven, they're established, but insurers are starting to look for them and leverage them more. So we're seeing direct questions about, are you following a framework? Are you following more than one framework? Again, prove to us that you've done everything, for basic hygiene in group one, for example, for CIS. And as mentioned, they're really pushing evidence and refutable evidence that you have the control and or compensating control in place.
Thanks, John. So really, what do you need to do? You need to establish a proper cybersecurity program with policies. You need to get oversight of your cybersecurity program. You need to understand what your gaps are and fill those gaps. If you can't fill those gaps or understand what those gaps are, you can't answer those questions on the cybersecurity insurance application. Or if you don't have those gaps filled in, again, you're going to either be getting denied or paying a higher rate. Really good idea if you haven't yet applied for or haven't, started the process of renewal of your cybersecurity insurance. Engage a company like us or someone else that you work with to do an external vulnerability scan first. You would be surprised how many times we see people getting denied or going through a much more difficult cybersecurity application process because they have some what looks like exposed openings to the internet of their corporate environment from a very basic vulnerability scan done by people that aren't IT experts. And we see a lot of cyber insurance companies doing this. They do a very basic scan. They see what is really not any kind of a significant concern, and all kinds of red flags go off, and then it's a much longer, deeper process. If we do that up front, we can clean some of that up so it's not going to be as visible or as much of an issue. So we just had a question pop up that's very relevant to what we're talking about. How long does the application process take approximately? I would say that's very dependent on the insurer and the industry you're in. On average, it's probably about a month if you have your information, really together and really well packaged and ready to go. If you don't necessarily have your information really well packaged and ready to go, and you need to put a lot of time, into filling out the questionnaire, getting it filled by others, it could be a couple of months. Remove excessive administrative privileges. That's something else that's going to be asked for and potentially checked against as a part of that process. And get MFA everywhere. The more MFA you have, the better. The easier it is to answer that question and the better place you're going to be in and the less likely you're going to see a higher rate. Train your users regularly on cybersecurity insurance. Most insurance providers are looking for annual cybersecurity training, and then they're looking on regular testing for phishing and those types of risks. John, can you answer that question? The question is, have we seen anything lately with insurers wanting a full PAM solution in place beyond just separate admin accounts and MFA?
You bet. Yeah. So a recent application to Coalition got that deep into what are you doing to manage your privileged identities? Do you perform access reviews? How often? What's in scope? So we are seeing that question, and it was specific to Azure 365 environments.
Yeah, and just for everyone's, the PAM is privileged account management. So how do you control admin accounts or more senior accounts that have more access? And do you have a solution in place for that? Some do it by, policy and process. Some do it by having a proper application in place that helps manage and monitor that.
Yeah, what they're really looking for is to try to limit users that are running day to day as an admin. And if you need administrative access, in a perfect world, you would request it, use it for the only, the time you need, and then lower your privilege. Another word for it is just-in-time access. So they're looking for temporary just-in-time admin access instead of being an admin day to day.
Yeah, and no regular user should have admin access. Someone who sits down at their computer every day to do their regular work shouldn't have admin access to your servers, shouldn't have admin access to Office 365. Those should be separate accounts they log in as. And in a perfect world, you have a separate account for each person that has that ability so you can do better logging and monitoring of who's been doing what in your environment when. The last thing is strengthen your posture and, advanced endpoint protection and monitoring. That enhanced antivirus is really another critical component that you need to have in place. Thank you, everyone, for taking the time to attend. Really appreciate everyone doing that. And if you have any more questions, please reach out. We have time to stay on the line to answer questions now. If anyone wants to ask any questions at the moment, if you don't want to ask questions right now, or you want to understand how things apply more to your specific environment, feel free to reach out to your account manager at Broadview Networks if you know who that is. If you don't, you can simply email solutions@broadviewnetworks.ca, or call us at 984-9897. Or of course, you can find out a lot of information on our website as well. So question is, how many times per year do you recommend conducting cybersecurity training internally? So the recommendation we see from the frameworks and from the cybersecurity insurance world is once a year for full training, and then usually quarterly phishing testing is sort of the baseline of what we're seeing from most of the frameworks and the insurance companies.
Yeah, CIS specifically has 8 or 9 topics that they recommend training on. So you can either do all of those, once a year, or you can make them a bit more bite-sized, manageable, and do a topic or two every quarter in addition to that phishing testing.
And again, feel free to ask questions in chat, or if you want to ask it live and have more of a discussion, feel free to raise your hand and we can turn your microphone on so you can ask that question live and any follow-up questions that way as well. We do want to be respectful of people's time, try to contain this to the lunch hour. So we do have 5 minutes left and we'll stay on if there's questions coming in the next couple of minutes. Otherwise, we'll drop off. But again, there's lots of ways to reach out to us and interact with John or myself for any follow-up questions. No, I mean, sorry, the question is, does it matter from where we get the cybersecurity training? No, as long as you have, some sort of cybersecurity training that is, recognized, has some sort of a certificate that goes with it. That's usually the proof they want to see, is a certificate being provided to your end users. And for the phishing testing, they may ask for reports of what was done, both what the results of the testing was and then what the remediation that was done. So as long as it's something that's providing, some sort of proof that it was done, that's usually going to meet the requirements. Question is, how do we feel about breach and attack simulation, attack surface management tools versus penetration test? John, I'll let you run with that one.
Sure. Yeah, I guess kind of comparing vulnerability, relate this to vulnerability scans, right? If you have the capability, tools, budget, etc., to do those simulations, just like you would ideally you would do a vulnerability scan before a pen test, the more you could do of that upfront on your own, right? You're going to have essentially it's an internal practice test before you do a live or third-party test. So those tools, if you can afford and deploy, those tools are recommended because you're showing that you're doing your homework ahead of a potential third-party test. Some insurers, right, require a test to be done by an external provider versus internally. But generally speaking, you want to do some type of internal testing versus a blind, expensive test from a third party. In addition, and I kind of alluded to it, it depends on the requirements too. Some insurers will take an internal test as you're doing the right thing. Others will say it has to be done by party XYZ or third party to be accepted. But yeah, attack simulation, any kind of security posture management tool that scans your security posture automatically or potential attack entry points, any of that, doing that ahead of time if you can is a great idea.
Thank
the
you
last
also
thing you want to
for the
do.
Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, Tyson.
Go
I
ahead.
was just going to say one quick thing is last thing you want to do is a penetration test without preparation, because the results won't be pretty if none of that due diligence is done first.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much for the questions. Any other questions, please don't hesitate to ask.